feelings that you shouldn't have to go back. None of us should have to go back and participate in it.
Did you describe particular experiences you had in Iraq? And if you could speak as loud as you can.
There was one incident in Ramadi, my second time there, which I was on a QRF mission. It was like you're the SWAT team for the military for some instance. We were on call for a 24-hour time frame. We got the call late at night, early in the morning. It was, we were going on the banks of the Euphrates River. We took a sharp right turn, and on the left-hand side, I seen 4 decapitated Iraqi bodies. When we parked our armored personnel carrier, I was told to get out to find evidence of a firefight or such have happened. There was an American soldier on the right with American soldiers around him, and he was saying they had lost it there. On the left-hand side, there was American soldiers kicking one of the heads around like a soccer ball. So at that time, I got back inside my APC. The next day, I asked if I could see a written statement or if I could put for what I had seen at that location, and I was told it was none of my concern and none of my business. So that's when I started questioning things.
And then what happened? How much longer were you in Iraq?
I was there for still another 2.5 months before I got a 2-week leave period, which I went back to Fort Carson, Colorado. At that time, I called a military lawyer and asked him what was my situation, what could I do? I didn't want to go back to Iraq. I was already having symptoms of post-traumatic stress.
Again, Joshua, if you could speak as close to the phone and as loud as you can.
Okay. They said that the lawyer said I had 2 choices, either go back to Iraq or go to prison. At that time, me and my wife and my children, we made my own decision, and that was to go on the run, which we lived in Philadelphia for 14 months underground until we made the choice to come across to Canada.
There is a case of Corey Glass this week who has a scheduled deportation back to the United States. He's another war resister on July 10th. Jeffry House, what happens to him now with this decision?
Well, it's not clear that this decision is directly related to him, although it might be that he would want to try to reopen his case in the federal court, because as it happens now, there's a broadened definition of when a person, a soldier, has a right to conscientiously object, not to war in general, but to specific activities of a specific unit that he or she may be in. So it may be possible for Corey Glass to do that. At the same time, the Parliament of Canada has called on the government to just let every soldier in these circumstances stay in Canada if they haven't committed criminal offenses, which no one has. That, I think, is the overriding reality here, that we have the elected representatives of the people of Canada telling the minority government, make something happen for these people. And it's just unfortunate that the government is dragging its feet and considering the issue and probably bending over backwards so that the U.S. administration is not offended. So essentially, that's Corey Glass's position right now. On the one hand, he's got a kind of invitation from the national parliament to stay here, and on the other hand, the administrative procedures are at the last point before actual forced departure to the United States.
I wanted to go to a clip of Corey Glass. Protests, actions are expected to take place this Wednesday at Canadian consulates in at least 13 cities here in the United States. This is Corey Glass's message to the Canadian Prime Minister, Stephen Harper.
I'm Corey Glass, and I'm an Iraq War veteran. I left the U.S. because of my opposition to the Iraq War. If I'm returned to the U.S., I could face court-martial, jail time, or even redeployment to Iraq. I have not been discharged from the United States military, and I'm now currently in the Individual Ready Reserve. The people of Canada support us. A recent poll shows that Canada wants war resistors to stay, and Parliament voted on June 3rd to allow us to stay in Canada. I have lived and worked in Canada for almost 2 years. I hope you will give full consideration to my case and the will of Canadian people, and please stop my deportation before July 10th.
That is war resister Corey Glass in Canada appealing to the Canadian Prime Minister. Jeffry House, how many war resistors, U.S. war resistors, are there now in Canada, and how does this compare to war resistors in Vietnam, like you?
Well, there's about 200 war resistors here now, and basically there's little comparison to the later period of Vietnam, in which there were 50,000 people here, mostly draft dodgers like myself, but also some who were deserters. Probably 10 to 15% were military deserters from the Vietnam War. One important thing, though, to remember is that early on in the Vietnam War, there were only a few hundred, and after a long struggle, the doors were forced open here. So prior to 1969, the numbers increased without much possibility, much clear possibility that people would be allowed to stay. But by November of 1969, Mr. Trudeau, the Prime Minister at that time, declared that Canada should be a refuge from militarism. Those were his words. And as a result, the doors opened and people flooded in, people who didn't want to participate in the Vietnam War. So consequently, I look at the numbers as a fluid thing, and it is to some extent kept low by the fact that up to this point, the government of Canada hasn't opened the door. But given that Parliament has done so, given that Parliament has made this recommendation to the government, I think that we may soon be in a situation similar to that when Trudeau made his declaration, and many more people may end up here.
Joshua Key, what would happen if you came back to the United States?
I don't know. I've been told many different things in many different scenarios. You would only know when you were sent back there on what would really happen. So.
And what has been the response of the Canadian people to you taking refuge in Canada?
Oh, as far as the Canadian people are concerned, it's about 95% positive. Where I live, I don't hear any public objection. I'm sure some people don't approve or believe in what I did, but I look at that as they don't know the circumstances or the case. Most people, if they hear the complete story in detail and they understand, then it's not, there's no questions.
Would you want to come back to the United States if you were not punished?
Well, I'd love to come back to my home. That's where my family lives. That's where my kids, grandparents, and their family lives. I mean, that'll always be home. And I've never had an objection with the American people. It's always been with the government. So I love America.
Joshua Key, will leave it there. Iraq war resister, a private in the U.S. Army, deployed to Iraq in 2003. Thank you very much, Jeffry House, lawyer for Joshua Key, speaking to us from Toronto. And that does it for the broadcast. Democracy Now! Is produced by Mike Berkshire, Fotokadusa, Armate, Angelique Kamet, Jeffrey Hagerman, Steve Martinez, Nicole Salazar, Hani Massoud, Robbie Karen, Mike DeFilippo, Miguel Noguera, Peter Curries, our engineers. Special thanks also to Hugh Grant, Samantha Chambly, Jay Salnor, John Randolph, Kieran Kudmeadows, Raquel Penny, Vesta Godars, and happy birthday to Laura Chipley. Our website is democracynow.org. You can sign up there for our headlines. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks for joining us.